Hi and welcome to the Philosopher's Games. Many wished for a little update video regarding Shadow of War after E3, and here it is, but I still recommend watching the last one. Also note that this is a neutral lore comparison from the book's perspective. But let's start. During E3 we got new information about some details we saw in the story trailer. One of the things we got is the name of this entity, Carnen, meaning red water. We assumed that she is an Entwive. It was also explained that she could transform into this dragon-like being here. I thought about this while editing the last video because the dragon had some similarities and looked special with all the vines and stone, but I discarded that thought. As explained, it is possible that there are Entwives in Mordor because when the wives moved further to the east to plant small things like vegetables, even teaching men some agricultural knowledge, Sauron came and burned that area down to prevent the movement of the army of the Last Alliance. With this, there is a possibility that he captured some Entwives and brought them to Mordor, maybe to help creating food for his armies. I have no good theory why Entwives should be able to transform into dragons. They are related to the Vala Yavanna, the goddess of nature or all growing things. Once she sang about the trees and suggested Manwë that there should be something to protect the growing things from the other higher beings like dwarves. So Manwë asked the transcendent god Eru and he agreed and gave those trees a soul. We can read in the Silmarillion that spirits from afar came into them. Now, spirits from afar can mean a lot in the Lord of the Rings universe, maybe even that they can change their form, but I would argue against that. They never do this in the books and their creation is highly related to being a tree protecting the growing things that cannot run away in the forests. I also don't see much need for them to be able to fly. It's a strange idea, but I'm interested to see how the game will explain this. Another possibility is that she is not an Entwive but some kind of natural spirit entity, but that would be pretty unusual lore-wise. She could be like Goldberry, Tom Bombadil's wife, so she would be potentially a Maya, which would make her a spirit being, allowing her to change her form. What was confirmed, and here are some little spoilers, is that she is the enemy or nemesis of this Balrog named Tar Goroth, which is strange since Tar is Quenya, meaning king or beyond, and Goroth is Sindarin, meaning horror. So they combined both languages in one name. In Sindarin, it should be Aran Goroth or Argoroth for King of Terror, or Sargoroth or Athangoroth for Beyond Terror, but I assume they want to say King of Terror. However, Tar Goroth was bent into rocks by Carnen once, but the new ring awoke the Balrog again, so Carnen must fight him anew and you can help her. This is also the figurine of the Mithril edition. Knowing this, I think she is not an Entwive or a very special interpretation of it. Even Celebrimbor states that they can't defeat her. Let's move on. Spider warning. I show you the timecode so you can skip this section if you don't like spiders. My last video got several comments mentioning a statement by the developers that this gothic lady is not Shelob. After seeing the interview, I have to say that I don't understand the statement in the same way. Also shoutouts to the Happy Madman for sending me the link to the interview. But let me explain. One part is that Shelob's brood is definitely in the game and we know Cirith Ungol is in the game too. That's where Shelob's lair is. It is also stated by the developers that she has her brood in Mordor. I don't know how correct this is from a lore's perspective because she slew her own offspring and the ones who fled to Mirkwood survived. So I'm not sure if there are more spiders left in Mordor. I would say Shelob and her offspring don't have the best relationship. But it's not far-fetched that if Shelob's brood and Cirith Ungol is in the game, that she also could be in the game herself. That would mean that we have at least one big spider in the game, and in fact we see one big spider in the trailer. Now comes the interesting part. Like me in the last video, the interviewer concludes that the big spider from the trailer must be Shelob, because we know there is this big female spider in Lord of the Rings who lives in Mordor, and Sauron calls her his cat. how many big spiders do we know that live in Mordor? So that must be her. Now the developer intervenes and the interviewer mentions Ungoliant. It's hard to understand because they are talking over each other. In the end, he suppresses further discussion with a statement that these are two separate facts. There is Shelob's brood and a giant spider in the game. Both the interviewer and developer agree that they don't connect any dots here. It's a very strange situation. Also, shoutouts to the interviewer for asking the question. I can see how you can understand this as this spider is not Shelob, but you can also understand this as we don't want to comment on this right now. For now there is Shelob's brood in the game and some giant spider. Why the developer intervenes so intensively is still a bit weird, since this is probably the first thought of any Lord of the Rings fan. It's like showing a giant ape on a place called Skull Island, and when the interviewer asks, "Is that King Kong?" the producer says, "We don't want to draw any conclusions here." So who else could it be? Lore-wise, when it comes to spiders, we only know about Shelob living in Mordor, in Cirith Ungol. Ungol means spider, by the way. She also lived there even before Sauron came to Mordor, so that would fit the timeline too. We also know that her offspring is living in Mirkwood, not in Mordor, but the developers already mentioned that we will be able to summon Shelob's brood in the game. Of course, it could also be Ungoliant, but that would be strange too. First of all, that is a force even Sauron probably don't want to deal with, because even his master Morgoth had trouble with her. Ungoliant is much, much bigger and probably lives far in the south. It could also be that she devoured herself and is dead. But of course, the game can interpret things differently. One property of Ungoliant is her never-ending hunger. Related to that, this spider-like entity does not seem very patient, so making plans and manipulating would fit more to Shelob, because she, for example, makes a deal with Gollum. Another option, it could also be one of Ungoliant's other unknown children from the Eret Gorgoroth in Beleriand that managed to escape the consequences of the War of Wrath, which was the destruction and sinking into the ocean of Beleriand. We don't know what happened to them, but why use a no-name spider if you can have the iconic original from the books? Even from a legal and license perspective, because the developers don't have access to the Silmarillion, but of course Ungoliant is mentioned in the Lord of the Rings too. A lot of speculation by my side, and I still don't see why this should not be Shelob or related to her. I think the developers just didn't want to comment on this so early to maybe prevent spoilers for people who are not so familiar with the lore, but this is just my theory. Let's move on. The elf woman who fights the Nazgul, as seen in the story trailer, was introduced a bit more. Her name is Eltariel, and she is the Blade of Galadriel. My elvish is not the best, so there are probably some mistakes here, but if it's Quenya, shouldn't it be Eltariel, which would mean Star of the High Garlanded Maiden, with the Garlanded Maiden being Galadriel? That would be at least a translation that makes sense to me. Eltariel could also mean star moving towards the Garlanded Maiden, but I would argue that you would say most likely Elenariel in this case, but it would work, I guess. It could also be Sindarin, but I could not make any sense of the tar in it. Elriel or Elnariel would be Star of the Garlanded Maiden, and Elanriel would be Star towards the Garlanded Maiden in Sindarin. So I guess Eltariel is Quenya and means star moving towards the Garlanded Maiden, but of course maybe I or the developers made a little mistake or just created a fantasy name, which is a possibility, because the Tengwar symbols on the new ring seen in the first trailer also make no sense if you read it, as explained in my first video. But there's more to Eltariel. If we look at the new footage, we also see that she has a jewel or artifact called the Light of Galadriel in her hand that seems to be the origin of this shield or this explosion. It's a quite powerful artifact, which is unusual for Galadriel since she is not known for making artifacts or jewels. Of course, she is one of the most powerful beings in Middle-earth and actually uses magic in Lord of the Rings, so I see where they're coming from. The most unusual part is that Eltariel is like an assassin for Galadriel. Even Celebrimbor asks this question.
Since when does Galadriel work with assassins?
Of course, in the books, Galadriel does not have assassins. She is more about being peacefully in her realms and protecting it with powerful magic and her presence, together with her husband Celeborn. From time to time she helps here and there, and later even destroys Dol Guldur, but I usually see her as someone very peaceful and with a lot of farsight. With this, she was able to avoid many huge conflicts during her life. Assassination seems a bit weird in that context. Another unusual part is the power level of Eltariel. Fighting against multiple Nazgul at once is something most men and elves would avoid if possible. Eltariel seems to be a race hunter assassin. In her reveal video it is also mentioned that she was able to kill Talion and Celebrimbor, and she can see Celebrimbor too. An interesting note is that Celebrimbor recognizes the light of Galadriel. Indeed, he and Galadriel knew each other. At the time when he started making the first rings of power with Sauron, Galadriel and Celeborn lived in Eregion too, but left around that time through Khazad-dûm, or Moria as the elves call it. She was also a distant cousin of Celebrimbor. Her grandfather was also his great-grandfather. Knowing this, maybe Celebrimbor even made the Light of Galadriel a long time ago himself. It is said in the Unfinished Tales that he loved Galadriel and that he created an artifact or jewel, Elessa Elessa, the elf stone, for her in Eregion to make living in Middle-earth easier for her. Another thing I noticed is that Eltariel sharpens Talion's sword with the light of Galadriel in her hand. So I guess this could give it some extra power or a new ability in the game. But there is more in this little trailer. Talion also asks what happened to the city and the Palantir. I assume they mean Minas Ithil, and that it will be taken by Sauron and the Nazgul, which is law-conform, because Minas Ithil had a Palantir and was conquered by Sauron, receiving the Palantir this way, even though it happened in the books around 940 years before Bilbo leaves the Shire for his adventure in The Hobbit. As mentioned in the other videos, the timeline is heavily compressed in these games. We can also conclude from the footage that Talion fought there, but was killed by Eltariel. He most likely also fought against the Nazgul there. It's also mentioned that Talion's and Celebrimbor's ring was lost. We can see this lady in the trailer carrying it. Maybe there is a connection to that, or they lose it again during the battle in Minas Ithil. If this lady is some illusion of Shelob, Cirith Ungol is quite close to Minas Ithil. It would fit. But I can also imagine that this woman stole the ring somehow at the beginning of the game. We can see this black shroud in this scene, and then Talion collapsing. It is reminiscent of that woman's black shroud holding the ring. Also, the area looks like the one where we saw this giant spider. As mentioned earlier, I still think that's the area of Cirith Ungol, and she is an illusion of Shelob. Maybe the ring gives her the power to create illusions like this, but maybe there is even a greater force behind all of this. Moving on. Another point is this ghost army and controlling dead orcs, so it seems there is some form of necromantic powers in the game. This is a difficult one. Lore-wise, necromancy is special in Lord of the Rings. We only know about a few things related to it. Sauron called himself, or was called, the Necromancer. The art is considered dark and evil. Here are all the examples I could think of. Sauron could communicate with spirits of the dead and with wraiths. He could also see the unseen world. The Witch King of Angmar and Sauron could summon some evil spirits, maybe fallen Maiar, to some extent. An example would be the Barrow-wights. Sauron, with the help of Celebrimbor, created rings that were able to transform living men into some kind of powerful spirit beings. The Nazgul, not dead but also not alive. These are ring wraiths that are powerful but never lost their body. It got transformed, so to say. It does not work in the same way on dwarves and most likely not on elves, only men and alike. A wound inflicted by a Morgul knife could transform the victim, if it was man or hobbit, into a wraith too. In cases where you swore an oath to a king, especially to a Dunedain king, to help fight against Sauron or his master Morgoth, and not fulfilling this, even helping those evil beings, could end in you being cursed. What now could happen is that this curse could be accepted by Eru himself, which will deny you access to the halls of Mandos, making you a powerless ghost-like being waiting for a way to break the curse. A curse like this cannot be created by Sauron directly and must be accepted by Eru. Of course, Eru can resurrect people, and with his permission even the Valar, but I would not count this as necromancy. Sauron can, by the way, not resurrect people. This is very strictly ruled in the Lord of the Rings universe. As you can see, necromancy is quite limited in Lord of the Rings. I don't expect the game to follow these cases or rules, so I'm interested to see how they explain this and what they will do. My almost last point is again the Balrog. I got many comments arguing that Talion and Celebrimbor can fight a Balrog. They can for sure fight and defeat a Balrog from the game's perspective. They have next level immortality and powers on, let's say, Maiar level in the game. Also the Frozen Lake could become handy. But from the book's perspective, they would not be as powerful and avoid fighting a Balrog at any cost. Even Feanor was killed by a Balrog and he was considered the most powerful elf who has ever lived, but his power was more about knowledge and creating artifacts. The same with his grandson. They could for sure fight with might, but against a being that is a demonic soldier, powerful in combat and destruction, it gets tough, even for powerful elves that are warriors. For example, the very powerful elven warriors Ecthelion and Glorfindel killed Balrogs. Ecthelion even killed the Lord of Balrogs, but they all died in that fight too. Gandalf, a Maiar, a divine being of lesser rank comparable to an angel, had one of the elven rings of power equipped and had a sword from Gondolin, most likely King Turgon's sword. The kingdom of Gondolin was attacked and destroyed by an army of Balrogs back in the day, so the sword was most likely well suited to fight a Balrog, and he still fought for 10 days and died together with a Balrog in the end. Also an interesting note, in this scene Talion is not wearing the new ring. So, from the book's perspective, those entities are very powerful and you would avoid fighting them at any cost. But of course, from the game's perspective, Talion will win. He can't die anyway. My last point is about Canon and why I make these videos. When you use a source material to create something new, to potentially reach a certain fanbase of the used source material, I think it's fair to make a comparison. If there are differences, that does not mean it's bad. It just means it's different. More interesting is the question, why is that? For Shadow of Mordor, I would say many rules and elements of the Tolkien universe maybe restricted the developer's vision of the game. The game does many things right, but different from the source material. For example, I think it's always very elegant in game, story and world design if you give the player some kind of explanation why your character respawns after death. Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War do this, but of course it's quite untypical for the Lord of the Rings universe. It is one of the differences, but it's a good, I would even say a very good explanation for a game that uses these mechanics. I also think Shadow of Mordor was a very good game that nobody expected. Maybe I misunderstand some of the feedback, but it seems some people think it's a bit unfair to make deeper lore comparisons, noting that the game is not canon, which is 100% true, and I know this, but we should not forget that Shadow of Mordor was promoted as a very lore-friendly game.
For Shadow of Mordor, the challenge was to create something new, but that was built on the foundation of Tolkien, and to be respectful of his ideas while incorporating ours, and to be respectful of the fans and the scholars.
And in some areas it is, but story-wise it's not always that lore-friendly, as explained several times. Maybe I understand the term lore-friendly wrong. Even Shadow of War is promoted as fitting seamlessly into the universe.
If you play our game and then go and read Lord of the Rings or watch Lord of the Rings in the films, is going to not only kind of seamlessly slide into that story, but actually expand or on some of the details in really interesting ways in regard to the lore.
But it's from my perspective no problem that it changes things, and maybe it must do it. Some people commented that they liked that the game goes into a totally different direction. With this said, I think making those videos and looking at the story from the book's perspective is interesting for a lot of people. The unusual amount of views for my very small channel and the massive positive feedback indicate this, so have no fear, I will continue making those videos. But I hope you understand now a bit better why I make them and why I think it's fair, even when the games are not and don't want to be canon. I hope you found this useful. It got way longer than I expected. Maybe check my other lore videos too. I also make other game-related content, so feel free to check my channel. If you like this video, consider the YouTube and Twitter things. Thank you for watching and goodbye.